The macabre history of the Whitmore family. A sinister tale. Scattered across the hills of western Pennsylvania lies a collection of church relics that no historian can properly trace. From Philadelphia to distant frontier congregations, 17 ornate relics hold slivers of bone and preserved flesh. Their origins are blurred by both time and design. Between 1745 and 1792, 73 people vanished from these communities. Devout men and women, and most chillingly orphans, who were later proclaimed saints by local leaders. Few are aware that a sealed packet at the Philadelphia Historical Society preserves 3 witness accounts that reveal the truth. The Whitmore family workshop, where for nearly 50 years human bodies were transformed into holy objects. At the church's request, the manuscript has remained closed to public view for centuries. Yet through careful research, I've uncovered the horror the religious establishment worked tirelessly to conceal. Before we delve further into the Whitmore family's gruesome trade, hit subscribe if you're brave enough for the kind of historical horrors most channels avoid. Then, drop a comment with the state you're watching from. Your own parish might hold secrets you'd never imagine. Now, let's descend, because what occurred in those Pennsylvania woods extends beyond what most historians admit, touching congregations whose descendants still worship in those very sanctuaries. Mid-18th century Pennsylvania was a curious religious refuge. Quakers, with their plain meeting houses and inner light, shaped Philadelphia and its surrounding counties. Meanwhile, the western lands filled with a patchwork of Protestants, Presbyterians, Lutherans, and small sects, raising modest wooden churches as they pushed into territory taken from native peoples. Into this world, the Whitmores arrived from England in 1742, settling in Chester County, 30 miles west of the city. There, rolling fields gave way to dense timber and scattered farms. Nathaniel Whitmore, gray-eyed, severe, with a trimmed beard on an angular jaw, presented himself as a master of sacred craft chalices, communion plates, and jeweled Bible covers favored by wealthier congregations. His 2-story timber workshop stood on the 12 wooded acres, large windows spilling daylight across benches where ministers and elders came to place commissions. His wife, Elizabeth, slender, deft-handed, and unflappably calm, ran the home and 4 children with a precision neighbors praised, if a bit coldly. On Sundays, the Whitmores sat quietly at Harmony Meeting House, a plain Quaker gathering, occasionally offering measured testimonies that impressed hearers with their spiritual gravity. Thomas, the eldest, worked at his father's side. Daughters Mary and Sarah kept household order with their mother, and the youngest, William, a frail boy with an unsettling gaze, wandered the woods alone for hours. Returning with plants and small animals he preserved meticulously in his room, a scientific habit his parents encouraged. Chester County endured ordinary colonial hardships, brutal winters, crop failures, the tension of the frontier. Yet religion and commerce both thrived. The Great Awakening had recently surged through the colonies, intensifying competition between denominations for souls and status. Buildings and sacred furnishings became badges of distinction, and Nathaniel's skill placed him exactly where demand swelled. By 1745, the workshop had grown to include 2 apprentices, Jacob Miller, a German orphan, and Peter Collins, a quiet youth from a poor Philadelphia family. The Whitmores lived comfortably, never ostentatiously, known for industry and piety. That reputation proved the perfect mask for what happened after the workshop shutters closed. Late that autumn, Mary Collins, a devout Quaker healer who tended the poor, vanished on her way home from a sickbed on the county outskirts. Colonial life often swallowed travelers, so fears softened into explanations and animal attack, perhaps, or Indians along the road. What no one knew was that Collins marked the beginning of a horror that would run nearly half a century. on November 17, 1745. As an early winter storm drove in, Mary walked the rutted path past the Whitmore property. The wind chased brittle leaves across frozen ground as the workshop lantern burned through the snowfall. Thomas Whitmore's later deathbed confession, found hidden in a Philadelphia cell wall, claims his father had studied Mary for weeks. Father said her sainted reputation made her perfect. Thomas wrote with a shaking hand. He told us God had revealed a great purpose to bring true holiness to the colonies through sacred vessels. Nathaniel emerged from the trees with a lantern, calling that his young son had wandered off. Mary, ever charitable, followed him toward a small clearing near the rear door of the shop, half hidden by pines. Mother had laid canvas across the floor. Thomas recorded, "I was 16. I thought when they spoke of creating relics, they meant representations." His handwriting falters there. The details of what happened in that back room, Thomas never fully set down. The aftermath, he did. Over 3 days, Mary Collins's body was methodically processed. Nathaniel, versed in English medical texts, taught his elders to preserve tissue with salts, herbs, and other fixatives. Elizabeth sewed black velvet pouches, each embroidered with gold religious symbols. Father said we were doing God's work. Thomas wrote that Protestant America lacked the relics that gave Rome its power, and that we would supply what true worship needed. I believed him. God forgive me. 2 weeks after Mary's disappearance, Nathaniel traveled to Philadelphia with several ornate boxes of his own making, returning flush with money and more commissions than before. At the next meeting for worship, he spoke tenderly of our dear friend Mary, and proposed a memorial. He presented a magnificent altar box in her honor. No one knew that a hidden compartment sealed inside contained a small piece of Mary Collins, the prototype for what would become hundreds of saints distributed for decades. Winter yielded to spring, and with the thaw came whispers out of Philadelphia. A small Episcopal parish claimed healings from a holy relic, the bone of an unknown medieval saint, obtained via a European dealer through a local craftsman. That craftsman, of course, was Nathaniel Whitmore. By 1750, the business had broadened. The shop had doubled in size. 5 apprentices now carved the public, facing goods, chalices and boxes, while the cellar rooms remained forbidden ground, reserved for the family's real trade. Elijah's stone and timber house rose, proof of growing wealth. Collins's disappearance had faded, replaced by other missing people. A visiting preacher here, a devout widow there, usually those with few ties, their absences attributed to dangerous roads or the ever-useful Indian troubles. What changed was selection. Mother developed what she called the discernment. Sarah Whitmore later wrote in a journal found in 1823, when the house was demolished, she could see whose bodies would yield the most powerful relics. God spoke to her, she said. With that logic, murder transformed into divine calling. They were only helping chosen souls reach their purpose sooner. Nathaniel built networks with churchmen from Pennsylvania to Virginia, greasing relationships with gifts, flawless craftsmanship, and confidential news of European relics arriving through his channels. He told ministers Rome had hoarded sacred power for centuries. Thomas confessed, and persuaded Protestants that privately acquiring relics could bring the same grace without Catholic doctrine. Ambitious clergy, eager to grow flocks, proved receptive. The machine expanded. Collaborators, mostly unwitting, reported miracles where Whitmore relics appeared. Those stories fueled demand and prices, while pastors were instructed to keep possession secret, restricted to elders, limiting exposure while magnifying mystique. None guessed that these ancient bones were fashioned below ground from their own neighbors. In 1753, a Lancaster physician, Dr. Samuel Winters, began asking the wrong questions after inspecting one healing relic. The tissue seemed far too fresh. Methods didn't match European practice. Before he could push further, Winters vanished on the road to Philadelphia. A month later, a Presbyterian church in New York displayed a finger bone of a 12th century healer, acquired, naturally, through a local craftsman. Through the 1750s and into the 60s, the pattern held. The Whitmores grew in wealth and reach. Their cellar remained closed to anyone not bearing the family name. Thomas became Nathaniel's steady right hand. William, the unsettling youngest, proved gifted at preservation, experimenting until his work passed as convincingly ancient. Mary and Sarah handled letters, ledgers, and a spotless public image that laundered the money with ease. The colonies edged toward revolution, and disruption turned conveniently into demand. With English imports choked off, churches clamored for sacred goods. The Whitmores struck a careful pose. Pious, patriotic, and studiously neutral, so business never slowed no matter which banner flew. Then 1781 to 82 opened a darker chapter, one that would in time unspool everything. As the war wound down and a spiritual hunger surged, Nathaniel and William identified a market that proved both profitable and damning relics of holy children. In February 1782, a 10-year-old named Joseph Miller vanished from an Episcopal orphan asylum in Philadelphia. Small, devout, loved by clergy, he was written off as a runaway. 3 months later, St. Michael's in eastern Pennsylvania unveiled a relic, the preserved heart of an early child martyr. That parishioners claimed worked wonders, especially for sick children. Attendance soared, donations followed. William proposed the children. Sarah's journal confesses in a blotched hand. He said their innocence made stronger vessels. Father hesitated, but the prophet persuaded him. God forgive me. I stayed silent. From 1782 to 1785, at least 16 children disappeared from church or poorhouse care within a day's ride of the Whitmore land. At the same time, demand for child saint relics exploded, commanding prices fivefold over adult pieces. The family's fortune swelled. Their insulation, too, scaling up, forced them to initiate 2 trusted apprentices into part of the secret. One, Daniel Foster, would become the crack that split the facade. Avon. The Philadelphia Yearly Meeting dispatched Elijah Thompson, a Quaker minister with legal training, to investigate creeping relic veneration among plain meetings and frontier churches. Thompson quickly noticed an odd constant: many artifacts, no matter the route, traced back to Nathaniel Whitmore. The Providence papers dazzled but crumbled under close reading. I began to suspect a manufactured system, not merely of relics, but of miracles themselves. He wrote as he tracked recurring witnesses who moved from town to town like agents. Their paths sketched a web whose center was the Whitmore property. Strange hindrances followed. Letters vanished. Notes were lifted from a locked trunk in an inn, and on the eve of his report to the yearly meeting committee, Thompson was poisoned at a dinner. He lived, but months were lost. During his recovery, conscience finally broke one of the inner circle. Daniel Foster fled the compound with a secret journal and shook Thompson. With what he had seen, bodies suspended like butchered stock, fluids draining into vessels, specialized tools, and preservation baths that kept human tissue uncannily lifelike. Most chilling of all was the family's manner. Prayerful, composed, as though officiating rites, not committing desecration. Foster's testimony and notes, however, burned with the rest of Thompson's papers when his home mysteriously caught fire. Weeks later, Foster's partial remains were fished from the Delaware. Thompson refused to quit. He rebuilt the case by memory and code with multiple informants. By late 1786, he had linked 27 disappearances and identified 9 churches housing Whitmore remains. What he still lacked was physical proof, and that came from within Sarah Whitmore. Snowbound and fraying under guilt in the brutal winter of 1787, She traveled alone to Philadelphia, found Thompson in the back of a Quaker bookshop, and spoke for hours. She confirmed everything. And worse, the scope, 70 plus adults, 20 plus children, methods, distribution list, and the existence of a cellar archive, retaining labeled samples from every victim, plus her mother Elizabeth's ledger cataloging each acquisition and sale. She sketched the hidden entrance and agreed not to return home. "I know I condemn myself," she told him. "But the children's faces give me no rest." When Sarah didn't come back, William instantly suspected betrayal. Family council turned grim, Nathaniel ill and muttering scripture, Elizabeth coolly listing what must be moved, William pacing like a blade unsheathed. They chose a split plan: William to hunt Sarah, Elizabeth to relocate incriminating stock to an old mine shaft on the western boundary. Thompson meanwhile assembled a small trusted force, 2 constables and 4 Quaker volunteers, determined not to lose time to a rising snowstorm. February 13, 1788, a night that every witness later called unholy. Through horizontal snow, the party reached the workshop at nightfall. Thomas Whitmore opened the door with unnerving calm and let them in. A constable followed his gaze to a large cabinet, found inside a black velvet pouch and a preserved human finger. Thomas collapsed to his knees. Pressed, he revealed Nathaniel lay ill in the house. Elizabeth and William had left hours earlier with trunks toward the western edge. 2 men went to intercept them. The rest forced Thomas to reveal the trapdoor beneath the sliding bench. What rose from the stairs hit like a fist. Chemical tang braided with human rot. Below lay a suite of rooms shored with timbers. One space looked surgical, glass jars of solutions. Instruments arranged with a jeweler's precision, a floor drain feeding channels in the stone. The next room stared back with horror: 3 bodies at different stages. 2 adults and a child, suspended from iron hooks, cut with exacting care, flesh treated to a waxen sheen. The third chamber, the archive, was worse still. Shelves from floor to ceiling held hundreds of labeled wooden boxes. Each, when opened, contained a fragment, bone, skin, organ, each tagged with a name, a date, a place. At the center sat a heavy ledger in Elizabeth's hand. Prices, recipients, fabricated provenances, notes on miracles. Thomas emptied out, told them the count: 79 adults, 22 children. Victims chosen by mother's discernment, by William's trained eye, singled out at meetings and revivals as vessels. As they documented what they could, a shout above brought them back up. The interception had turned bloody. One of their men slumped with a deep knife wound. William fought like one possessed. He gasped. They'd found Elizabeth and her son at the mine shaft, shifting boxes. Elizabeth bargained. William circled and struck, killing one volunteer outright. The pair fled into the trees with what they could carry. At first light, the manhunt widened. Nathaniel was gathered from the house without a struggle, drifting between pious justification and confusion. 3 days later, searchers found Elizabeth and William in a hunter's cabin 12 miles away, side by side on a makeshift altar. They had taken poison, leaving notes that framed their deaths as consecration. Thomas was tried quietly in Philadelphia in April and hanged May 7, 1788. His full confession matched the seller's proof. The thorniest problem left behind wasn't the trial. It was the relics. Hundreds already resting in churches up and down the eastern seaboard. Civil and church authorities, after long private deliberation, chose containment over confession. To protect the faithful from ruinous disillusion, Judge Bradford wrote in a sealed memorandum. The records would be sealed for at least a century. Involved officials sworn to silence. Churches were informed discreetly and offered 2 paths: turn the remains over for quiet burial in unmarked graves, or handle the matter internally with absolute discretion. A third path emerged, never publicly admitted: Of the 43 churches listed in Elizabeth's ledger, at least 17, by later reckoning, kept the remains knowingly. Their rationale was chilling in its practicality, if miracles occurred regardless. Perhaps God had sanctified unwilling sacrifices, some said. Others spoke bluntly of donations, attendance, and prestige. Thompson was aghast. He created before the seal fell a confidential registry naming victims where possible and mapping the last known locations of their parts, meant for memorials when truth could breathe. The Whitmore buildings were burned. Officially an accident, unofficially a cleansing. The land went to the state, then on to buyers who knew nothing of what had happened there. Sarah received a new name and Quaker protection in Boston, where she lived out her days tending orphan children. I have tried to balance scales that cannot be balanced. Her final diary line reads, "The tools and formulas were said to be destroyed. Yet whispers persisted that medical schools or collectors preserved pieces for the science." Early 19th century texts hint at tissue methods strikingly like Williams, never citing the source. This tale might have stayed buried, but for a courthouse fire in 1879, waterlogged packets, including fragments of Thomas's confession, were mishandled, and a curious clerk whispered to a reporter. The Inquirer ran a sensational mix of truth and invention on November 17, exactly 134 years after Mary Collins's last walk, only to retract under church pressure. By then, many parishes had quietly disposed of what they once venerated. Others had folded the object so deeply into tradition that even elders forgot the origin. In 1923, workers renovating the Historical Society uncovered a hidden cache: Thompson's duplicate file. The director preserved it but kept access restricted. Scholars with special permission reconstructed the scope and the aftershocks. A discreet 1967 survey found 11 churches that still held items matching the ledger. Responses ranged from horror and cooperation to denial and refusal. The Harmony Meeting House still stands, long since repurposed and then abandoned. Locals avoid it after dark, swearing the place makes the skin crawl. The philosophical wound may cut deeper than the physical remains. Objects treated as holy, handled with trembling reverence, were in fact the spoils of serial murder. Yet testimonies of miracles came from sincere people with no stake in the ruse. Was it suggestion, coincidence, or does belief itself bend reality? The questions stray far beyond this case. In 1992, ground-penetrating radar mapped anomalies beneath the old Whitmore acreage. Chambers of filled shaft. Limited digging matched descriptions, but the owner shaken halted work. In 2005, a Western Pennsylvania Lutheran church renovating its altar found a hidden velvet pouch and a 1788 letter. DNA confirmed human tissue. The pastor buried it with a plain marker. Unknown child of God, finally at rest. The workshop site never prospered. Crops failed there. Animals refused the grass. Some say that on certain November nights, a faint outline of the old building glows, though nothing has stood for 2 centuries. If this history chilled you, share it with someone who likes their truth dark. Like the video, subscribe, ring the bell. What secrets sleep in your town's parish archives? The most enduring lesson of the Whitmore affair may be how history is edited. Governments and churches sealed, burned, and redirected the record to shield institutions and the faithful. What we call the past is too often the remainder after power has had its say. The Whitmore victims, devout men and women, and the children most of all, were slain twice, first by the knife, then by the silence that followed. Somewhere in eastern Pennsylvania, unmarked graves still hold portions of those people. Other fragments may rest in reliquaries, whose stories were laundered clean. The scattered pieces mirror the fragmented memory we inherit. Part here, part there, the whole never quite assembled. So the next time you enter an old church and see a relic glimmering in a niche, you may find yourself wondering about its path. In that question, you honor those nearly erased, and you insist that no reputation outranks the truth. However terrible, do you think everything came to light, or do some altars still hide a darker provenance? Tell me below. And if you want more histories most won't touch, subscribe and stay with us in the shadows. Apollo.